Curioso, and welcome back to the Welsh History Podcast, episode 263, The Worst in the World. It's difficult to discover any aspect of life in Wales which is not transformed by locomotion. Between 1840 and 1870, over 1,400 miles, or 2,300 kilometers, of railway were built across the country, an investment of roughly £20 million in less than a generation. It was, as the historian John Davies reminded us, the achievement of private capital. Parliament gave permission, but it did not plan and it did not pay. And that absence of planning would shape everything that followed, because no one set out to build a Welsh railway system, but through Wales, a network that tied the valleys to the ports and the ports of England did exist. And by 1920, one commentator would deliver a brutal verdict. From the national point of view, our railway system was the worst in the world. Today, we go back to the years before that judgment to discuss and build on what we know about the Welsh rail system, why it worked the way it did, and why it was considered to be the, in quotes, worst in the world. The Edwardian era from 1900 to 1913 was a time when Welsh railways were at their peak and were already beginning to fail the nation they crossed. By 1900, railway maps of Wales looked impressive. Lines ran deep into coal valleys of the south, tracks cut across the industrial northeast, rural routes threaded throughout mid-Wales, linking market towns and coastal resorts. But if you look closer, a pattern does emerge. Most of the lines did not connect to Wales itself. They actually connected outward to English markets, to English ports, and to English capitals. The dominant force behind much of this system was the Great Western Railway, whose influence stretched across South Wales and into the west. Alongside it operated the Cambrian Railways, covering much of mid-Wales, and a patchwork of smaller companies absorbed or controlled by larger English interests. This, of course, matters, because if the railway lines are not neutral, they shape the economies, they shape movement, and of course, they shape identity. And in Wales, they reinforce a simple truth. The railways were built to extract, to take coal, iron, and slate out of Wales. They were also meant to bring English tourists and English holidaymakers into Wales, not to integrate Welsh communities with one another. Traveling from Cardiff to London was straightforward. Traveling from North Wales to South Wales was not. There was no unified system, something of a problem that exists even today. As David Lloyd George pointed out in the House of Commons debate in 1898, quote, "First of all, the railway proposes to serve a district which is not served at the present moment by any line of railway, either the Cambrian nor the London and North Western, or the Great Western. None of these lines tap this district at all. It is a very, very large and important district, one of considerable mineral resources, and it contains large agricultural area." End quote. There was profit, not national vision, in those mentalities. Just a series of commercial decisions, each line built where the profit could be made, each route designed to move goods outward as efficiently as possible. The result was a country connected in fragments, and members of Parliament were concerned about how this was creating issues not just in Wales, but across the United Kingdom. Quote, "I am convinced that if all railways were under one system and empty trucks had not to be returned to a source whence they came, the traffic would be worked much more cheaply," said Sir Arthur Markham, who, at least in 1913, spoke in favor of nationalizing the rail system. If you want to understand Welsh railways in this period, you must start with coal. By the early 20th century, South Wales was one of the most important coal-producing regions in the world, and railways were the arteries of that industry. Every day, thousands of tons of coal moved from pithead to port, from valleys like the Rhondda and the Cynon, down to the docks at Cardiff, Bury, and Swansea. The system was efficient in one sense. It moved vast quantities of material quickly, but it did come at a cost. and passenger travel was often secondary to the movement of goods. Lines were congested with freight, schedules prioritized exports over people, and infrastructure was pushed to its limits. In peak periods, trains almost ran continuously. Engines strained under heavy loads, tracks wore down under constant pressures, and railway companies invested where it made commercial sense. Additional sidings for coal, improved access to docks, more efficient loading systems, but cross country links, passenger comfort, rural accessibility, those were always going to be secondary concerns. And so while industrial Wales was tightly connected to the global market, ordinary Welsh travelers often found themselves navigating a fragmented and inconvenient system, one of which that could be, on occasion, quite dangerous. Nowhere is this more obvious than in rural Wales. Mid Wales remained sparsely connected. The Cambrian Railway provided vital links, but coverage was thin. Journeys were slow, connections were unreliable, and service was infrequent. For many communities, the railway was not a daily convenience, it was an occasional lifeline. To give you an understanding, this is an era where cars are new, they're expensive, they're unusual to find on the road. Most people are still traveling by horse, even at this juncture. It's not until after this period that it becomes more common and you start to see cars more often in communities as they get cheaper and are mass produced. All of this means there is no real big bus system or some way of getting people around quickly. And horse travel, while it's quicker than doing it by foot, is not necessarily that speedy. And there isn't sort of a obvious waterway travel from mid Wales to the other side of England that would make sense. So you don't have a fast travel. So trains are one way to do that. It's always, since the mid 1800s, been an important way of moving people across the United Kingdom quickly and efficiently. And even to this day, a lot of people still will take trains to get around. So it's not like this has gone away, and some of these concerns have gone away, and we'll address a few of them for sure. Agricultural goods could be transported and livestock could reach markets, but the system was not designed with rural life in mind. It was the afterthought. And this had consequences. Economic development lagged and opportunities were limited. Young people left for industrial centres or emigrated entirely. The railway, which had transformed parts of Wales so dramatically in the 19th century, now revealed its limitations. It could connect, but only where it was profitable to do so. There was, however, one area where the railway seemed to bring Wales together: tourism. By the early 20th century, rail travel had opened up the Welsh landscape to visitors. Seaside resorts like Llandudno, Aberystwyth, and others, such as the mountains of Snowdonia, attracted hikers and holidaymakers. Railway companies actively promoted these destinations. Posters advertised the beauty of Wales. Special incursion trains carried visitors from the English counties. And let's be honest, also from South Wales across the country. It's not like there was just people from England who were traveling here. For a moment, it seemed as though the railways were creating a national shared space. But even there, the underlying structure remained the same. Tourists arrived from England, typically. Routes were designed to bring them in and take them home. Internal connectivity remained limited, and the system was outwardly facing. Even leisure followed the same logic as industry. Wales as destination, not Wales as connected to the whole. And this is a problem we see even now in the 21st century. Train travel across Wales is difficult. It is awkward. It is not something you would understand unless you've been here. To understand the way it works, think of it like a reverse E, where most of the travel is done across the spine of England, and then pockets of this travel go into sections of Wales. So you have sort of a South Wales version of train travel. You've got a Central Wales or Mid Wales travel point, and then you have a North Wales travel point. And depending on how popular those destinations are, that will determine the amount of trains you've got going from one to the other. Obviously, South Wales, popular location, lots of big cities. There's a lot more travel. Mid Wales, where it's very much a more sparse and rural environment, you've got a lot less travel. all of this to say that much like in modern times, back then you have this same issue. The reality is it's aiming at trying to move, if it's moving people at all, it's concentrating around the idea of getting people to and from Wales without necessarily worrying about whether or not the Welsh population in Cardiff wants to travel to Pwllheli, or the population of Wrexham wants to travel to St. David's. There just isn't an option in the way you would think of. In order to do that, you have to go out into England and come back in. It's not as simple as just going from one to the other. Even a few years ago, I took a train from Cardiff to Manchester, and I had to go out to Shrewsbury to get to Manchester because you didn't have a way of going straight up from Cardiff north into North Wales and then over. It is one of the big concerns that goes along in Welsh politics quite frequently, and more recently has been a discussion of some of the way money has been spent and justified. So it's still an issue today, even as we talk about it at this point. So keep that in mind as we go along, as kind of why this is happening. So obviously, it's all about Wales being a destination and not a connection point. It is not something where they worried about the fact that it's connected as a country. They worried about whether or not it was accessible for all of the things they wanted to ship out of it and all of the people they wanted to ship into it. And that's all they really worried about. And to be fair to the companies, they were doing it because that's where the profit margin was. If there was a profit margin to be found in creating a north to south or south to north rail system, they probably would have done it. But the fact that there wasn't, in their logic, it was justifiable not to bother, which is kind of ironic, but still, especially when you consider how beautiful Wales is to travel around. The idea of doing a coastal rail system that traveled from Pembrokeshire from Pembroke up to, say, the Llŷn Peninsula would be a beautiful and wonderful view, but they didn't do that. So you just don't have those combinations of situations. You just don't have that obvious link that creates a national unity in that respect. And of course, you also have the fact that they're doing so much industrial movement, especially in the south and in the north, that it's causing strains to show. Cracks are appearing. Accidents, of course, are not uncommon in the early 20th century railway world, so it's not a surprise that derailments, collisions, and mechanical failures were frequent visitors to the rail system. And it didn't mean it happened all the time. It didn't happen with such constant sense that you couldn't ride the rails without feeling safe. But the fact is that it happened enough. When you calculate the way it works today, where there's an occasional derailment and everything shuts down and there's major changes done in order to avoid it, or they take in some environmental problems and considerations, you just don't have that in the same way back then. I mean, certainly they take certain things under consideration, but the reality of it is they want to get things running as quickly as possible, and sometimes that took precedent over safety. So keep that in mind as this goes along. We're talking about it from that perspective. In Wales, there was heavy demand of coal traffic, and it increased exponentially over time as we go through this early period, where coal is the big driver of the economy of Wales. And of course, tracks wore quickly under this pressure, under the weight of all this coal. Engines were, of course, being pushed hard, and as I said, not every care was taken in the front of safety. In the House of Commons, there was a great deal of debate on rail safety, and elder statesman, Liberal MP James Caldwell said, quote, quote, "There was this additional reason in the case of the railway servants, that owing to the dangerous nature of the occupation, there was not only risk to the life and possibly injury to the person of the workman himself, but there was likewise the risk of loss of life and possible injury to the person or fellow workman and the traveling public, through excessive hours of labor, depriving the workmen of the amount of vigilance which was so necessary in so dangerous an occupation." End quote. Maintenance struggled to keep pace. Railway workers operated in dangerous conditions for long hours doing intense physical labor, and as anyone working in coal would find it, meant that they were exposed to hazards both directly and indirectly. Yet, even with that, there were intent to see safety systems improving. Signaling technology advanced, procedures became more standardized, but progress was, as you can imagine, uneven and often reactive. Problems were addressed after incidents occurred rather than preventing them through coordinated planning. Again, the absence of a unified system made itself felt in these circumstances. Each company operated according to its own priorities. There was no single authority ensuring consistency across Wales. And that wasn't just in Wales. It was also a problem all throughout the United Kingdom. There's no, just because we're mentioning Wales, keep in mind this is still happening with the entire system. So we're not avoiding this just because, you're in Northern England, especially, or Scotland, or, anywhere like that. You're going to have this same issue. The early 20th century was also a time of growing tension. Industrial unrest spread across Britain, and of course, this meant that it happened in Wales. And an issue we're going to talk in depth about later this month, the Tony Pendy riots and other strikes which took place and will be discussed, as I said, in later episodes, highlighted the deep division within the industrialized society. Railway workers, like miners, often faced difficult conditions, low pay, long hours, and limited security, as mentioned above. In 1911, as national railway strikes brought much of the network to a halt, for Wales, this was a moment of revelation. The system that had come to dominate daily life could also be disrupted. Its vulnerabilities were exposed, and the dependence on labor was made clear. The railway was powerful, but they were not stable. So by the time of the editor of 1920 made his judgment, what was he meaning? Why call the Welsh railway system the worst in the world? Not because it lacked engineering, not because it lacked scale, but because it lacked coherence. It fragmented, built by competing companies, serving competing interests, prioritizing export over integration, industry over people, profit over planning. Travel within Wales could be slow, indirect, and journeys requiring multiple changes. Routes often made little geographical sense, and there was no centralized vision of what they wanted the Welsh rail system to be. No national framework, just a legacy of decisions made in isolation. By 1913, that legacy was impossible to ignore. And yet, this was also a moment of peak performance. Traffic was high, industry was strong, railways were central to everyday life, but change was coming. The First World War would transform the system. Government control would replace private competition, and eventually consolidation would reshape the network. But in 1913, all of that lay well ahead. What remained was a system that worked, but only in parts. A system that powered an economy, but failed to unite the nation. The railways of Wales were a triumph of engineering, an investment, and ambition, but they were a reflection of priorities, and these priorities, bluntly, were not Welsh. They were commercial, they were external, and they were fragmented. So, by the early 1920s, the judgment had already been written. A railway system that transformed Wales, that created, in effect, the modern version of the Welsh rail system we have. But it was never truly connected. It was never truly a national system in the way that it would reflect a normal national system. And in part, that's just down to a couple different things, I would argue. One of which is the fact that the political system in Wales was fragmented, that there was no centralized government for Wales, and so there's no advocacy being done for Wales by that government. The national government was a government that reflected English priorities. It didn't have necessity to look at these things in the way that you would if you were working with something like the Senate today. Now, people will make arguments about whether the Senate today does this, but the reality of it is advocacy for Wales has increased because there's representation in Wales. There is a government in Wales with government priorities, with government interests, which then can, at the very minimum, at least prioritize issues for the Welsh people. It may not be perfect. Certainly, it never would be, but yet it offers them an opportunity. When you don't have that, when you just have a national government and then localized governments of cities and communities and parishes, they're so fragmented and so many that they don't have a unity in policy and idea. And so that's why these things happen. That's why you see society fragmenting in the way it is, and there isn't this unified voice, which is why actually there is this group in Britain right now that are growing in number that are calling for these separations of these major distinctions that is the makeup of the United Kingdom, that Scotland, that Ireland, that because all of Ireland at this point is still a part of the United Kingdom, and Wales and England are all separate and need to be governed in a separate way that allows them to remain members of the kingdom but still have their own unique voice represented. The problem, of course, is that the population swing between England and the rest is so vast that it makes it difficult. Even today, this is still a discussion point that a lot of people have had. There's been talk about how do you make the politics of the United Kingdom work for every member of the United Kingdom. And all sorts of suggestions have been made. We'll get into some of them down the road, but it is something to reflect on that this is a microcosm of the problem. I mean, yes, part of it is that the rail system was done by private companies. Private companies don't have a desire for national vision. They have a desire to make profit, and I don't blame them by any means, but the rail system was built with that in mind, not within an understanding that we need to have a national project that's going to have national consequences. That may have been happening at a national level, but it certainly wasn't happening at a Welsh level. And so, with all of this said, and with all of this done, thank you once again for listening. Thank you for watching. I hope this was informational. We'll be talking more and more about the rail system as we go along because it takes more and more importance on discussions that are happening, especially in the latter half of the 20th century, about what it is and what it should be. And one could argue it continues into the modern discussions we're having today. So with all that said and done, thank you very much. Once again, if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, you can always reach me at welshhistorypodcast@gmail.com. You can reach out to me at most social media at Welsh History Pod, on Facebook at facebook.com/Welsh History Podcast. And we're starting to release videos onto the Patreon. We're going to do the first one coming up soon on Sagonim. Sorry, try that again. We're going to be releasing one this month on the Roman fort at the end of Hadrian's Wall. So I hope you'll join me there if you want to view this particular video. It's coming out later this month. So with all that said and done, thank you all. Have a great day. Diolch yn fawr. Welsh History Podcast is a member of the Evergreen Podcast Network. To find more information on them, you can do so at evergreenpodcasts.com. Thanks for listening.